Today we are talking about the PTS changes that have happened since the first version of PTS. It was an item change along with some guard changes, so we're going to look at those ones. Even though technically actually there are multiple item changes, but we'll get into that. And then I'm also going to talk about some items that are so far untouched that, in my opinion, may need some changes before the patch goes live. I've already forwarded this to Hyris as well, but I wanted to touch up on it as well. But first, let's talk about the changes that have been done. The first change is a buff to Height of the Nemean Lion. So if you haven't watched the patch notes yet, you don't know what happened to it, the old passive was entirely removed, which I think is very unfortunate. I think the reflect mechanic was always a good counter, especially to crit builds. That is no longer the case. However, instead, Height of the Nemean Lion received a new passive. Every 15 seconds, this item generates a block stack for the owner, maximum 1 stack. And this one was buffed now, increasing the maximum stack count from 1 to 2. And I think this makes the item drastically better. Initially I thought it was not even worth picking up, but now I can definitely see more potential for it. Let me explain that. First of all, the stacks are stacking up at any point, outside or in combat. So say you're getting into a fight, and you have the 2 stacks that you built up before, then now you have 2 attacks that you initially block, and if you survive for 15 seconds, which many tanks do, you will get an additional block within that same fight. Also, if you survive a fight and a disengage happens, which I think we'll see more often because of the Stone of Gaia buff as well, then if there is a second engage, you will have 2 stacks once again, and that can make a massive difference depending on who you're fighting. If you're fighting a crit hunter, then taking away 2 of their potential crit shots and also denying them the crit passives like Wind Demon or Poison Star that would come with that can actually be pretty potent. The item will obviously be very interesting on characters that already have block, because then you can stack even more block stacks on Athena or Bellona, for example. Especially Bellona boxing into ADCs could be very interesting with this item. And it will also synergize pretty nicely with Shell, which would give you a total of 4 block basic attacks, and that is massive in a team fight. I don't know how exactly those will work together, but I'm assuming they would just be used up after each other. And what's really interesting here is that Height of the Nemean Lion used to be a counter item primarily for characters that at least had some level of defense or health already, because it was just something that requires you to soak up damage still. Now you can actually build this on squishies. So if you were building this on a mage, for example, because you're struggling with a crit ADC, then you can build Heart of the Nemean Lion, you get the 2 stacks on that, and you can get your support to build Shell and get another 2 stacks on that. And 4 crits or 4 basic attacks that are denied on a squishy can drastically change the outcome of a team fight. Obviously it depends on the attack speed of the enemy as well, but even delaying your death by 2 seconds can make such a big difference. Not only in Conquest, by the way, also in game modes like Duel. So yeah, with Nemean's passive essentially being doubled, I think it could be a much more interesting choice now than in its first form. The second change affects Ratatoskr, and I said it was kind of an item change because it actually affects his acorns. The first one is to the Evergreen Acorn. The Evergreen Acorn is the one that will heal you for 7% of your maximum health and mana when damaging an enemy with your abilities. This one gets a price increase from 1,900 to 2,050 gold, and the same thing happens for Thick Barked Acorn as well. So all of the acorns are going to be 2,050 gold, because honestly they're all equally strong at least anyway, so I think this is fair. In Evergreen Acorn's case, the health bonus is also decreased from 15% to 10. And I think that is fair. It still makes you massively more tanky if you build into a heavy health build, and you're still going to be able to sustain incredibly well, and you still require the enemy to actually build anti-heal to deal with you. So I do think this nerf is justified, and I think we might see more nerfs to Evergreen Acorn as well. The second nerf is also to Thick Bark Acorn. Along with the price, it gets another nerf, and that is the protection bonus of this being decreased from 15% to 10%. Basically the same thing. Thick Bark Acorn is the one that allows you to use Flurry twice, that you've already seen in one of my gameplays as well. It also comes with a 3% health heal, but not with a mana heal, so the other tank Acorn essentially. And again, I think that's very much fair. I think both of these felt relatively strong from what I was able to see on PTS so far. The third nerf is to Bristlebush Acorn. And this one, I think, is also justified, though I'm a bit surprised about this one because of the angle it takes. So Bristlebush Acorn is the crit acorn that gives you currently 45 physical power, and that is going to be nerfed to 35 power. And along with that, it gives you 20% movement speed, 20% crit chance, and allows your dart to crit. And then also gives you lifesteal and basic attack damage after you crit an enemy, or hit an enemy with your dart actually. It doesn't even have to crit. So let me explain why I find this a little bit surprising. I think it's very interesting that the acorn is currently the cheapest crit item, and it comes with a 20% crit chance, so a relatively high chance, and it also comes with high power and movement speed, and still decent power now. So essentially you're getting boots and 20% crit for roughly 500 extra gold over normal boots, and you get various benefits in your passive as well. The problem that most crit characters are facing on the current patch is that they're forced to build certain specific items outside of crit to be fully effective. You have to have a mobility item like boots, you have to have a pen item typically like executioner, and if you're an ADC you typically have to have a lifesteal item as well. Ratatoskr kind of gets most of that in one item. He gets the mobility, he gets the crit, and even gets temporary lifesteal, just a little bit though not quite to the same extent. So he saves a lot of money and gets access to a lot of things very quickly. So what I thought would happen is that the crit chance would get nerfed, because I don't see why this has such a high crit chance for such a low price. I think this item would be completely fine with a 15% crit chance, or maybe even a 10% crit chance, and then you are forced to build more crit to just make full use of the passive of the item. Seems fair to me, that was my impression, but maybe that still happens down the road. I know that Thistlethorn Acorn is not mentioned here at all, it's not getting any nerfs, and I can't really form a full opinion on that because I wanted to test certain things with that on PTS to see how much potential it really has, and unfortunately PTS was already down, so that will have to wait until live client. Depending on how exactly the formula works, this item may not necessarily need nerfs as much as the other acorns at least. But again, something that I'll have to test fully first before I can make a complete judgment on that. Now let's take a look over to Thoth. All of the changes that were proposed and planned for Thoth were actually scrapped. None of that will happen, but he will get other changes instead. So anything you saw in the first iteration of PTS is no longer happening. Instead, he will receive multiple buffs to Hieroglyphic Assault. His base damage on the ability will be increased from 40 to 120 to 45 to 125 per shot. So between the 3 shots, you get an extra 15 base damage. Additionally, the mana cost is decreased from 60 to 80 to 50 to 70. So these ones are just straight up buffs, whereas beforehand he kind of received tweaks, which was somewhat odd to see considering that Thoth wasn't exactly meta or anything. Maybe they were afraid that with the change to Spear of the Magus he might become more meta or something. I do think that this is probably not the end of what we've seen in terms of Thoth changes. The initial change was actually worded very confusing on the patch note. It said, this damage increase will affect all enemies, not just guards, and the actual change here was meant to be this ability increases the damage all enemies take from each subsequent shot by 20%, not just guard, and in return the fall off of the damage would be increased, so if you hit enemies at a long range you deal less damage, and the scaling was increased. So the idea here was you get rewarded for hitting a guard multiple times in a row, so if you aim well you get more out of this, and you can also clear better through that, and at the same time he is less dangerous at super long ranges where he can just kind of poke you out. I thought that was actually an interesting concept, but in practice apparently it didn't feel all too well. But I am thinking that Hi-Rez will reapproach this somehow, just so that Thoth can end up in a more overall balanced state, especially between competitive and casual as well, and adjust maybe the range damage later down the road, along with some other changes, and this is just kind of a temporary band-aid until they fully figured out what they want to do with them. There are some changes that surprised me a little bit because they did not show up here. Some items that I thought would receive some nerfs after PTS, though that could obviously still happen. One of those is Serrated Edge. I don't think Serrated Edge is completely over the top, it's also somewhat limited in which characters can use it effectively, but among those who can, I think this item is extremely strong. I am a bit surprised that it didn't get a little bit of a nerf. I'm not expecting a massive nerf on this one, but maybe a minor nerf to the passive or to the lifesteal or maybe the movement speed even. The item just seems to offer a lot at once and be like an all-around solution for many things. Another one that I think might see at least a minor buff is Executioner, because I don't think I saw anyone pick it up on PTS at all. It doesn't seem worth it compared to many different hunter options that are available right now. And then, last but not least, and this is by far the most important one here, Atalanta's Bow. Atalanta's Bow is so insanely good that we literally banned it from our customs on PTS after 2 games because we were like, this is not okay. You cannot deal with this item in an effective way unless you're using it yourself. I might go into more detail on this in another video, but just to briefly put this into perspective, Atalanta's Bow is 2,200 gold right now, and so is Executioner. Atalanta's Bow has 30 power right now, and so does Executioner. Atalanta's Bow comes with 30% attack speed, Executioner comes with 25%, slightly less. Atalanta's Bow comes with 20% flat penetration. Executioner comes with 7% per stack, so Executioner has up to 21% protection reduction. That's when it's fully stacked, and that is its passive. So they are very similar. Atalanta's Bow has more attack speed. Executioner will allow your teammates to deal a little bit more damage, but Atalanta's Bow will deal a lot more upfront damage with early abilities and everything you use before 3 shots. It will also deal more damage to multiple targets, and it'll allow you to deal more damage to objectives. So it's, in almost every regard, better than Executioner. But different from Executioner, on top of all of that, it also has an extremely strong passive, meaning if you just get a single assist or a kill, you will get plus 20% attack speed for 10 seconds, which means that item can have a total of 50% extra attack speed, and that in my opinion is also insanely strong. On top of that, you also get a half haste effect. It's not a full haste effect, but it's enough to stick to enemies much better. And that means that essentially this item is a combined Executioner and Hasten Fatalis almost. You're a little bit slower, but you also have more attack speed. That obviously is heavily snowbally and insanely good in any situation, so you just build this item instead of Executioner very early in your build, and you just have to have 1 lucky assist, 1 kill, and it procs, and you just run through the rest of the team. It's absolutely crazy, and it happened multiple times, so I can tell you that this item is as scary as it sounds, if not worse. And I've heard a lot of people suggest that the movement speed is the main issue, the haste, but I don't even think that's the case. I think the main issue is the fact that A, it gives you up to 50% attack speed, the base attack speed would probably have to be lowered significantly, and B, that it comes with 20% penetration. The other items that do are Titan's Bane, which is just all around designed for penetration, and Serrated Edge, which is specifically only for basic attack focused characters, so that it doesn't become overwhelming on hunters. And Atalanta's does not fit in that same niche. Atalanta's is just way over the top because it has so many other things at the same time. Almost forgot to mention, Spear of the Magus probably needs nerfs as well, because that also has a truckload of damage for your entire team. Outside of that, I'm sure there are other items that might need some nerfs later down the road when things have clarified a little bit, especially looking at Failnot here, which comes with flat penetration and all the crit benefits, which sounds like a very scary combination to me. But we'll have to see about that at a later point. For now, I think these are the most important changes, and everything else will just be something we have to figure out yet. Maybe, for example, Stone of Gaia is way too strong for solo, but again, we'll have to wait and see. But these things I think are urgent and should probably be looked at before the things go live. By the way, if you haven't checked it out yet, yesterday I made a build guide for a new hunter, ability-based hunter build that is going to be very interesting next patch, and I highly recommend checking that out, because that is actually some really exciting theory crafting right there. Other than that, thank you very much for watching. If you're new to the channel, feel free to hit the sub button and maybe the bell so you get updated for other SMITE news and everything else. And other than that, see you for the next one soon. SLOTH, out.